So much has happened in a positive direction with this Browns team this season that it's easy to forget that a lot of these pieces that are running this team, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, head coach, GM, are all first-year guys, and the ones that aren't are relatively young players still on their rookie deals like Myles Garrett and Baker Mayfield. So what I want to do is look at the key parts, right? The key leadership roles in this team: offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, head coach, GM, quarterback, franchise defensive player, and grade them based on what they did in 2020. So I'm going to jump into the tier list maker and make that happen. But before I do that, I want to make sure I give a shout out to the Dog Check tier Patreon members. And as always, I start with Michael Matique, Rob Farron, Kyle Stouffer, Lukey from Munich, David Roth, J Guy 101, Musty Taco, Sean McGrinty, Joe Bobby, Keith Gerkak, Brad Calbo, Daylon W, Bodie Cook, James McGinty, Arenda Hall, Rex Kaufman, Chad Gimme, David Molinado, Andrew Sadejo, Dylan Hill, Josh Mendor, Joseph Stevens, Eric Green, Jaleel Salim Jr., Martha Krusna, Mark M, TJ Showman, Stuart Moore, Bobo Regretti, Anthony O, David Arndt, Robert Jermaine Jr., Dave Mike May, John Cummings, Andrew Hirsch, SSJ Swift, Seth Miller, Mandela Moore, the only Browns fan in Wisconsin, Curtis Bayer, Batman, Rush Sharir, Barack Kumar, John Alver, Beerman 069, Masayua, Buds of Roland, James Nemo, Mac House, Reeve Hertz, Justin Cole, Philip Wilcoxon, Marie Viver, CK, Keith Anderson, Sean Barron, Gagos Pisano, Corporal Nick Lopez, Dom Guzzulo, Nick Nasty, Ian Whitaker, Colin 216, Anthony Latham, Christian, Matt Bond, Dave Strong, Michael Stone, Soul Train, Charles Work, Billy, Michael Hodenack, Jarrett Austin, Moose Gentry, Patrick F. Austin Z, Mark Burnett II, Andre Griffin, Otis Wolf, IT Rex, Greg Ehlers, Austin Bolin, Jesus Serrano, Chris Phones, Picktown Brown Backers, Mark Kahn, Max Out Dojo, and Water Bear Marketing. Again, guys, thank you so much for the support on Patreon. It means a ton. It is a huge help in my ability to do this year-round and bring you this coverage. So again, guys, thank you for that support. But without further ado, let me get into the tier list maker and get these Browns a grade. All right, let's jump into this and how I have these grades set up, or at least how I'm looking at it for myself. A is awesome. Best job you could do. Could not imagine you being much better than you were this season. B is pretty good. Just some rooms for improvement. Some critiques that I think are valid about that player or coach that could be vital to having more success. C, I am unsure about this person in the future with the franchise. I feel like the next year coming up will be vital to their future with this team. D, borderline, you might have to go. You might have to get fired. So if you get a D tier, that's what that means. F tier is you should be fired. Like Freddie Kitchens fired last year kind of tier. That's what we're rocking on F tier. All right. Now that we know the tiers and how we're going to go, I'm going to start off with Andrew Berry. And I feel like Andrew Berry did some great things. When you look at the key signings, you have Jedrick Wills, Jack Conklin, Austin Hooper, Ronnie Harrison was a trade that he made, Malcolm Smith, BJ Goodson. He drafted Donovan Peoples-Jones, had some small key pickups like MJ Stewart, who showed up big in the playoffs. So pretty good job there. Also did a good job restructuring, re-signing, or extending guys. Chris Hubbard, underrated, huge signing for this team. Chris Hubbard doesn't get re-signed or restructured and it ended up instead being a cap casualty like most GMs would have. Then you're talking about, like, you probably lose 2 more games than you would have and miss the playoffs, because Chris Hubbard was that important because Wyatt Teller went out. You had a lack of depth on the offensive line, and we saw how the depth problem showed itself to be so big once Chris Hubbard went out with that ACL tear. So Chris Hubbard is a low-key re-signing that he had, but it's a big deal that he did that, right? Rashard Higgins, another big deal re-signing there. It was kind of like a prove-it deal that he gave to Rashard Higgins. Luckily, Rashard took it, and Rashard ended up playing a huge role in this season once Odell went out, to the point where, like, I don't know if this team gets as far as they did without that signing. Another thing that was important, Kareem Hunt, getting him extended for more years on a very cheap deal was very important when it comes to the future of that tandem with him and Nick Chubb. Olivier Vernon, getting him restructured was a big deal as far as cap implications for this offseason. Myles Garrett, getting him extended under reasonable money That's huge. You know, like $25 million is not like cheap by any means, but a guy, Myles Garrett, a guy as good as Myles Garrett, definitely is going to command more than $25 million at the edge rush position. So you got lucky there, and you saved yourself about $5 million of cap space. So congratulations to Andrew Berry there. Also, he put some young players in some good positions to be able to develop. Jordan Elliott, Taki. Wyatt Teller is the big name there, right? Turned out to be one of the best guards in football this year because he was put in a position to be successful. And David Njoku, also somebody who improved from the year before. So a lot of good with Andrew Berry. But there are some cons with Andrew Berry. There are some things that I wish he would have done differently or would have addressed with more aggressiveness. And what I mean by that is he was not aggressive in addressing some of the losses in depth in the secondary and defensive line, right? While he did make the trade for Ronnie Harrison, and that did end up being a net positive, the trade for Ronnie Harrison, it just wasn't enough moves. He had to make more moves to make up for this. And this is something that you can get in trouble with if you're the GM of a win now team, right? If this were just the same old Browns, it wouldn't matter that he didn't do enough in this area because you wouldn't be in a position where that would hurt you. But now that this team is good, it did end up mattering that he wasn't aggressive in this area and decided to see what his young players can do, decided to see if Sheldrick Redwine can step up at the free safety position instead of getting a veteran to take his role, you know, deciding to see if Jordan Elliott can step up in the absence of Andrew Billings instead of getting like a guy like Mike Daniels who could fill the inside in more competently than a young player and more physically than a young player in the shotgun run end up being a big deal. You know, these are the things that kind of got in the way of Andrew Berry getting a perfect grade. Also, because it ended up creating a situation where you have guys like Andrew Sadeo and Carl Joseph just being overexposed because they're just playing too many snaps or asking to do and cover way too much space. Another thing that's not talked about with Andrew Berry that I'm going to say is a negative, cutting TJ Carey as a Cutting TJ Carey as a cap casualty turned out to be a huge misstep, right? TJ Carey is a versatile corner. He's not the best corner in the world, right? But he's a versatile corner. He can play inside. He can play outside. He's a strong zone corner, and he's somebody who can also play a little bit of free safety in a hitch. And that's exactly what you needed this year, that kind of utility defensive player. And, you know, TJ Carey goes to Indy, has a good year, and would have been extremely useful this year for the Cleveland Browns. I don't know why they did not hang on to them. It ended up biting them in the butt. And that's the one personnel decision that I would say Andrew Berry did not do well. But overall, when you look at the grade, I'm going to give this a B+ for Andrew Berry. I'm going to put him in that B tier, high B tier, because ultimately he did everything he needed to do and then a little bit more, right? It's just you wanted him to go a little bit further and he didn't go a little bit further, so it's a little bit disappointing in that sense. The next guy we're going to talk about is the man of the hour, Kevin Stefanski. I think this is an obvious A tier. I'm going to spoil this list before I even put it there, but he's obviously A tier, right? Offense was a revelation. Play calling was great. You know, halftime adjustments were great. That was a great thing to see out of this staff, the halftime adjustment ability. I know some people are going to complain about like a handful of play calls that Kevin Stefanski had that didn't go the right way, but like out of all the play calls this season, like a handful is not a lot. Supporting staff around him was great. Stepped in perfectly when he was not able to coach that playoff game in Pittsburgh. When you talk about buy-in, this is somebody who the whole locker room was buying into not only his personality, but his message, right? One game at a time. All bark, no bite. The Browns had no bark this year, but they had a ton of bite this season. And that was an obvious change from 2019 where there was a lot of bark, but they went 6-10. And the parallel to them this year is the Pittsburgh Steelers, who had a ton of bark, you know, and they had a reason to bark at the beginning of the season. They did start 11-0, but it ended up being nothing but bark at the end of the season. You got Chase Claypool on Twitter. You got Stephon Tuitt talking about easy wins. You got Juju talking about Browns is the Browns. They ended up being the team, you know, in some justice in a way that got the bark, but no bite. The Browns were all bite, no bark, and that's great to see. That's a hallmark of this coach. The growth of these young players like Rashard Higgins, Wyatt Teller, and Njoku has a huge part to do with Kevin Stefanski and his ability as a coach. The growth of Baker Mayfield in this offensive system has been tremendous. I'll get to that when I talk about Baker Mayfield, but it has been an absolutely tremendous growth that you have seen from game 1 to 17 to the playoffs with Baker Mayfield. It is amazing. It should be talked about more. In reality, this is the best first year a Browns head coach ever in Browns history, stretching back all the way to the days of Paul Brown, has ever had. It is the best year period a coach has had in the expansion era for the Cleveland Browns. So yeah, obvious A tier for Kevin Stefanski. Nothing less than A tier for him. Tremendous job. All right, now we're going to go to Alex Van Pelt. I feel like I'm going to put him in A tier here too. Again, the job he did with Baker Mayfield was tremendous. The job he did filling in as a play caller was tremendous, even though, there were some issues with the play calling late in that game that people have kind of forgotten since the Browns won it in such a fantastic fashion. There were some issues there with the play calling at the end of the half where they were kind of preserving clock for no reason. Some of the timeouts were weird, but that's expecting a lot out of Alex Van Pelt at that point, right? Somebody who just had to step up midweek to be the offensive coordinator and somebody who had to step up that week to be the play caller. But did a great job calling plays. Again, did a great job developing Baker Mayfield. And this is a guy who's going to be a head coach candidate in a couple of years, or maybe even as soon as the end of next season. Because if you look at his track record, he has a real quarterback guru track record, right? There are a lot of guys in the NFL that have the quarterback guru moniker, but have no quarterback guru to go for. The biggest fraud in this is the coach out in Arizona, Cliff Kingsbury, who, yes, he's been around a lot of great quarterbacks, but they've never been great with him, right? You talk about Patrick Mahomes, you talk about Baker Mayfield, you talk about everybody that's been with Cliff Kingsbury. They're known for what they have done without him rather than with him. This is a guy whose resume is starting to build up that's legitimate. It starts in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers absolutely loves Alex Van Pelt. He had that year that people were actually talking about Andy Dalton being close to an MVP candidate in 2015. That was Alex Van Pelt. He was the quarterback coach. He was tremendous that year. And now his work with Baker Mayfield, turning him to somebody who was an interception machine early in his career, to a guy who threw less than 10 interceptions, including 2 playoff games. So he's going to be looked at as a head coaching candidate if the Browns have the type of season next year that people think they're going to have. So that's going to be interesting. All right. This is the controversial one. Joe Woods. At points, I've had him in D and F tier in this season. I think the lowest I have had him was in D tier or close to F tier after that Jets game, because it was a tremendously awful, it was a horrendous job of coaching there against the Jets. And he does frustrate you, right? He is a guy who likes to play it safe. He will play prevent. He will get into that prevent defense much faster and much easier than you would want him to. He does not like the blitz. All the things that frustrate a lot of fans, he does. But there is success there. We have to be honest. There is success there. For as fledgling of a defensive unit that the Browns have had out there, they've gotten a lot of turnovers, and they've gotten a lot of huge plays out of this defense. There were more than a couple of games that were won off this defense, and that's significant because this defense is not good. You talk about a defense that has a lot of turnovers and a lot of interceptions that can't cover. That's good coaching by Joe Woods. So it goes both ways. And his last 2 games, I don't think were bad. I think he had a really good game against Pittsburgh, and against Kansas City, he had a good game. He was just going up against Andy Reid, who's one of the best offensive coaches in football. So it's hard for me to be mad that he didn't look great against Andy Reid. So for that alone, right, the way he ended out the season, the way the defense stepped it up at times, I have to be fair. I know a lot of fans aren't going to agree with this. I'm going to put him in C tier. I'm not sure. I'm not completely sold on him as the defensive coordinator of the future. I don't think he's going to be a head coaching candidate anytime soon. But I'm not out on him. He deserves a second year. Let's see what he can do with better defensive players, a better deck of cards at his hand. And if he stinks next year, if the defense stinks next year, if the same problems arise next year, okay, then we could talk about replacing him. But until then, I am going to be on the fence with him, not off the fence with him. Now let's move into your two leaders as players, your two team captains, and honestly, the two guys who are going to be the future of this franchise for a long time to go. And that's Baker Mayfield and Myles Garrett. We're going to start with Baker Mayfield. I'm going to put him in A tier. Here's why. Baker started this season, and the expectations were just find out about Baker. Can he be a guy? Is he a quarterback? Is he a game manager? Is he a franchise quarterback? Is he a gunslinger? Who is Baker Mayfield as a quarterback in the NFL? I thought we would end the season knowing he's a gunslinger and thinking he's borderline franchise. Boy, has he blew my expectations out the water. And it's not like I had low expectations for Baker Mayfield. He was tremendous this year after week 6 especially. After that Pittsburgh game, he was absolutely a franchise quarterback, absolutely a top-tier quarterback, absolutely at points put the team on his back. You talk about the Cincinnati game, 1 minute left, no timeouts, drives them straight down the field. You talk about the comeback against Baltimore. You talk about the comeback against Kansas City. You know, he went from a guy that people thought was a game manager or on his way out the league, the most dramatic people. I didn't think that, but a lot of people thought that, oh, Baker was a bust, right? Because he had a bad year, even though he set the rookie touchdown record. But a lot of people were out on Baker Mayfield. He went from that at week 1 to, by the divisional round of the playoffs, being so good that Andy Reid is willing to go for it on 4th and inches on his own 40 with a minute left, because he knows if he punts the ball to Baker Mayfield, more than likely he's going to score a touchdown and win that game. So that is a tremendous jump for a player. I know we talk a lot about the jump that Josh Allen made, and rightfully so. Josh Allen made a tremendous jump this year, but the jump from week 1 to week 17 to the divisional round with Baker Mayfield, it is mind-blowingly good, right? You talk about the manipulating defenses. A guy who was criticized for being a one-read quarterback. Now he's looking off safeties and manipulating them with his eyes. He's so confident with the offense. He found a way to be successful and carry the offense with not great wide receiving play, right? Like Rashard Higgins is good, but he's not necessarily as good as Odell. You had Jarvis Landry out there who was hurt most of the year. Donovan Peoples-Jones. Like, these aren't like world-changing, all-world wide receivers that he was throwing the ball to, like a lot of people assume with Baker Mayfield. He was out there doing it with pieces that you can say he was definitely elevating. So Baker, I mean, like, that's what you want from a franchise quarterback, right? Elevating wide receivers, elevating the players around you. Baker absolutely did that. And man, if he gets better than he was at the end of the season next year, we're going to be really excited about the future of Baker Mayfield. I don't want to jinx anything, but that definitely would be the case. Now, Myles Garrett, boy, the way he started the season, I thought I was going to have to make a new tier for Myles Garrett to rank him, right? I thought I was going to put A++ or tier or something like that, because he was absolutely insane to start the season, but he fizzled out at the end. A lot of it was due to him getting the virus, dealing with the protocol, dealing with the breathing issues he had after he got it, and then also just dealing with the amount of scheming that went his way after he dominated so early. You know, he got a lot of attention from offensive lines, and that ended up being an issue for Myles Garrett. Not saying he had a bad second half of the season, it just didn't match how awesome the first half of that season was. And that's why I'm going to put Myles in B tier. I feel like there's room for improvement. I feel like he needs to finally put a season together where not only does he start hot, he finishes just as hot as he starts. That's a lot to ask for anybody, but for Myles, I don't think it's a lot. You know, He's hovered around 13, 12 sacks a couple of times in his career. I want to see him make that jump to 16 to 18 sacks, be the sack leader, and be the defensive player of the year, because we know he's capable of doing that. So for Myles, I want to see that jump. That's why I'm going to put him in B tier. But that's my grades for the key players and the key members of this Browns coaching staff and leadership group on the player side. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.